The antique jewelry box sat on Eleanor Warner's dresser, untouched since Thomas's funeral 3 weeks ago. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across its polished mahogany surface. Eleanor traced her fingertips over the intricate carvings, her wedding ring catching the light. She was 58, with elegant silver streaks in her chestnut hair and eyes that had cried enough tears to fill an ocean. Today marked the first time she found the courage to open it. "Mom?" Rachel's voice echoed from downstairs. "The lawyer called again. We need to sign those papers by tomorrow." Eleanor didn't answer. Instead, she lifted the lid of the jewelry box. Thomas had always kept it locked, claiming it contained family heirlooms too precious to risk losing. She'd never questioned him. In 29 years of marriage, she'd never had reason to. Inside lay the expected velvet-lined compartments with cufflinks, tie pins, and his grandfather's pocket watch. But something was different. A slight unevenness in the velvet lining. Eleanor's fingers discovered an edge, a hidden compartment beneath. Her heart quickened as she pulled out a yellowed envelope. The handwriting on it wasn't Thomas's. It was feminine, flowing. The date marked 15 years ago. Eleanor's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Thomas, Alex asked about you again today. I've kept my promise all these years, but it's getting harder. He has your eyes, your smile. Someday he'll want answers I can't give. The money helps, but a boy needs more than financial support. He needs a father. I understand your choice to stay with your family. I've never asked you to leave them. But please consider meeting him, just once. He's 10 now, smart and kind, just like you. Forever yours, Sophia." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Thomas, her Thomas, had another child? A son? Her mind raced through calculations. 15 years ago, they'd been married 14 years already. Their daughter Rachel had been 15 then. The doorbell rang downstairs, followed by Rachel's footsteps and the sound of the front door opening. "Mr. Blackwood, please come in. Mom's upstairs. She'll be down in a minute." Gregory Blackwood, Thomas's attorney. Eleanor had forgotten he was coming today to discuss the will. She quickly refolded the letter, tucking it into her cardigan pocket. Her legs felt unsteady as she made her way downstairs. Gregory stood in the living room, his leather briefcase placed precisely on the coffee table. At 65, he carried himself with the practiced authority of someone who had spent 4 decades managing other people's secrets. "Eleanor," he nodded solemnly, "my deepest condolences again. Thomas was a dear friend." Rachel, standing by the window, looked every bit the successful attorney she was. Tailored pantsuit, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. At 30, she'd already made junior partner at her firm, yet recent divorce proceedings had brought her temporarily back to her childhood home. "Let's get this over with," Rachel said, gesturing to the couch. Eleanor sank into the cushions, the letter burning against her chest. "Yes, please." Gregory opened his briefcase with methodical precision. "As you know, I'm here to review Thomas's last will and testament. There are some—" He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Unexpected provisions." Rachel took a seat beside Eleanor, reaching for her hand. "What provisions?" "Thomas made some significant changes to his will 6 months ago." Gregory removed a document and placed it on the table. The majority of his estate, including controlling interest in Warner Health Pharmaceuticals, has been designated to, he cleared his throat, a beneficiary named Alexander Martinez. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Alex, the boy from the letter. "Who is Alexander Martinez?" Rachel demanded, leaning forward. Gregory's expression remained professionally neutral. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the nature of Mr. Warner's relationship with this beneficiary." Eleanor pulled the letter from her pocket with shaking hands. "He's Thomas's son, isn't he? With a woman named Sophia Martinez." Gregory's composure slipped momentarily, his eyes widening behind his glasses. "Mrs. Warner, don't lie to me," Eleanor whispered, unfolding the letter. "I found this today." She handed the letter to Rachel, whose face paled as she read it. "This is impossible," Rachel said. He couldn't have." "The provisions are quite clear," Gregory continued, regaining his professional demeanor. "Mr. Warner has left you both a modest allowance and the family home, but the company and majority of assets will transfer to Mr. Martinez in 30 days. 30 days, Eleanor echoed. "Why the delay?" "Standard legal procedure," Gregory replied, not meeting her eyes, "to allow for probate and any potential challenges." Rachel, still clutching the letter, stood up abruptly. "This is fraud. My father would never disinherit his own family." "I assure you the will is legally binding," Gregory said. "Thomas was of sound mind when he signed it." Eleanor felt a strange numbness spreading through her body. The room seemed to grow dimmer around the edges. "Mom?" Rachel's voice sounded distant. "Mom, are you okay?" The letter, the will, Thomas's betrayal, 30 years of marriage built on lies. Eleanor felt her chest constrict, her breath coming in short gasps. I can't breathe," she whispered. Rachel's face swam before her. "Mom, Mr. Blackwood, call an ambulance." The last thing Eleanor saw before darkness claimed her was Gregory Blackwood's face, not concerned, but calculating, as though her collapse was merely an inconvenient delay in his schedule. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room penetrated Eleanor's consciousness before she opened her eyes. Steady beeping from a heart monitor kept rhythm with the throbbing in her head. "She's waking up," Rachel's voice, followed by the squeak of a chair being pushed back. Eleanor blinked against the harsh fluorescent lighting. What happened? A doctor appeared in her field of vision, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair. "Mrs. Warner, you experienced an anxiety attack that triggered a vasovagal response. Essentially, you fainted. Your blood pressure dropped dangerously low." "Has this happened before?" the doctor asked, checking Eleanor's vitals. "No," Eleanor whispered, though that wasn't entirely true. She'd had anxiety attacks before, especially in crowded places or during confrontations. Thomas had always shielded her from stressful situations, handled all the uncomfortable conversations. His protection had become her weakness. "Mom never tells anyone when she's struggling," Rachel said, her voice tight with worry. "She's had social anxiety for years, but refuses to see anyone about it." The doctor nodded. "I'm recommending you follow up with your primary physician and consider speaking with a therapist. Emotional trauma can manifest physically in very real ways." After the doctor left, Eleanor turned to Rachel. "I'm sorry." Rachel took her hand, eyes brimming with tears. "Don't apologize. It's not your fault Dad was living a double life." The reality of their situation came rushing back. "The will," Eleanor murmured. "We're going to lose everything." "Not if I can help it," Rachel said, determination hardening her features. "Dad's will doesn't make sense. He adored you, adored us. Something isn't right." Eleanor closed her eyes. "He had another son, Rachel, for at least 25 years. That doesn't mean he wanted to leave us destitute," Rachel insisted. "Dad built Warner Health from nothing. It was his legacy, our family legacy." A nurse entered with discharge papers. "Mrs. Warner, you're free to go home, but please take it easy for the next few days." Rachel helped Eleanor gather her things. "We have 30 days before that will take effect," she said quietly. 30 days to figure out what really happened. As they walked toward the hospital exit, Eleanor spotted Gregory Blackwood waiting by the reception desk, his expression unreadable. "Rachel," Eleanor whispered, stopping. "I can't face him right now." Rachel squared her shoulders. You don't have to. I'll handle this. Eleanor watched as her daughter approached the attorney. Despite her anxiety, a flicker of determination sparked within her. For 29 years, she'd been Thomas Warner's quiet, supportive wife. She'd allowed him to shield her from conflict, to make all the important decisions. That woman died today, alongside the memory of her perfect marriage. She had 30 days to discover who she really was without Thomas and to fight for what rightfully belonged to her family. The Warner family home stood on a quiet, tree-lined street in Lakeshore's most prestigious neighborhood, built in the colonial revival style. Its white columns and manicured lawn had graced the cover of Michigan Home and Garden twice in the last decade. Now, as Eleanor looked at it through the car window, it felt like a stage set, beautiful but hollow, hiding the reality behind its perfect facade. Gregory said he'll send over copies of all the financial documents tomorrow, Rachel said as they pulled into the driveway. I've also requested Dad's personal calendar and correspondence from his assistant at Warner Health. Eleanor nodded absently, her gaze drifting to Thomas's home office window on the second floor. How many calls had he made from there to his other family? How many lies had he told while sitting at the mahogany desk she'd given him for their 20th anniversary? Inside, the house felt cavernous, filled with memories that now seemed suspect. Eleanor moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, touching photographs, wondering if Thomas had been thinking of his other son when they were taken. Rachel disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with 2 cups of tea. I called my firm. I'm taking a leave of absence to sort through this. You don't have to do that, Eleanor protested weakly. Yes, I do, Rachel said firmly. Besides, it's not like I have much going on right now. Her recent divorce had left her raw, disillusioned. Now, discovering her father's betrayal seemed to have hardened something in her. We need to find them, Eleanor said suddenly. Sophia and Alexander. Rachel set down her cup. I was thinking the same thing. If this Alexander is getting everything, I want to look him in the eye and ask why. Eleanor stared into her tea. The letter said Thomas was sending them money. There must be a paper trail. We'll start there, Rachel agreed. I'll go through Dad's financial records as soon as we receive them. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the bed she'd shared with Thomas for nearly 3 decades, replaying moments of their marriage, searching for signs she might have missed. Had there been unexplained absences? Phone calls he'd taken in private? Weekends away that hadn't quite added up? Nothing stood out. Thomas had been attentive, loving, the perfect husband and father, or so she'd believed. Around 3 a.m., Eleanor gave up on sleep. Wrapping herself in Thomas's old cardigan, the familiar scent of his cologne now a painful reminder, she made her way to his office. The room was exactly as he'd left it, desk meticulously organized, books perfectly aligned on shelves, not a paper out of place. Thomas had always been precise, controlled. It had balanced her more emotional nature perfectly. On impulse, Eleanor sat in his leather chair, running her hands along the smooth desktop. What secrets had he kept in this room? She began opening drawers, methodically at first, then with increasing desperation. Tax documents, insurance policies, nothing unusual. Until she reached the bottom drawer, locked. Eleanor stared at the keyhole. In 29 years of marriage, she'd never once attempted to open this drawer. Thomas's privacy had seemed sacred, his trust in her absolute. How foolish she'd been. The small key she'd found in the jewelry box earlier, the one that had led her to the hidden compartment and the letter, glinted in the moonlight streaming through the window. With trembling fingers, Eleanor inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. Inside lay a single manila folder labeled S.M. Sophia Martinez. Eleanor's heart raced as she opened it. Inside were bank statements showing regular transfers to an account in Pine Ridge, a small town about 3 hours north of Lakeshire. 25 years of payments, increasing steadily over time. And photographs. A young woman with striking features and warm eyes, holding a baby. The same woman, older, standing beside a teenage boy with hauntingly familiar eyes. Thomas's eyes. Alexander Martinez. Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. This boy, this stranger, was going to inherit everything Thomas had built, everything that should have gone to Rachel. As dawn broke over Lakeshore, casting long shadows across the office floor, Eleanor made a decision. Social anxiety or not, she would fight for her daughter's inheritance. She would find Alexander Martinez and confront the truth, no matter how painful. She had 29 days left. The financial documents Gregory Blackwood delivered the next morning filled 3 banker's boxes. Rachel spread them across the dining room table, her attorney's mind already cataloging, analyzing. "This is going to take days," she muttered, opening the first folder. Eleanor stood in the doorway, clutching her coffee mug like a lifeline. She'd barely slept, the photographs from Thomas's locked drawer haunting her dreams. "I found something last night," she said quietly, placing the folder labeled SM on the table. Rachel's eyes widened as she flipped through the contents. 25 years of payments, almost $3 million in total. "There's an address in Pine Ridge," Eleanor pointed to a bank statement. "And these photos." Rachel studied the image of the teenage boy. "He does have Dad's eyes." Her voice cracked slightly. "There's more," Eleanor said, taking a deep breath. "I've been going through old credit card statements. Thomas made regular trips to Pine Ridge, always claiming they were fishing weekends with college friends. "Every month like clockwork," Rachel confirmed, checking the dates against the bank transfers. "Always on the 3rd weekend." Eleanor sank into a chair. "How could I have been so blind?" "You trusted him," Rachel said. "We both did." The doorbell interrupted them. Through the frosted glass of the front door, they could see the distinctive silhouette of Gregory Blackwood. "I'll get it," Rachel said, squeezing her mother's shoulder as she passed. Gregory entered with the precision of a surgeon, briefcase in hand. "Ladies, I've brought the documents from Thomas's office at Warner Health as requested." "Thank you," Rachel said coolly, taking the additional box. "I should mention," Gregory continued, "the board of directors is meeting tomorrow to discuss the transition of leadership. As per the will, Alexander Martinez will assume control of Thomas's shares, giving him majority ownership." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "So soon?" "Business continues, Mrs. Warner," Gregory replied. "Warner Health employs over 500 people. The board feels it's important to establish stable leadership quickly. And who is representing Alexander Martinez's interests until the 30 days are up?" Rachel asked, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. "I am," Gregory said, "as executor of the will." After Gregory left, Rachel turned to Eleanor, her expression grim. "We need to look at Dad's work files immediately. Something about this doesn't add up." The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork. Eleanor forced herself to focus, despite the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her at every turn. By evening, they had created a timeline of Thomas's involvement with Sophia Martinez, but little else. "We need to go to Pine Ridge," Eleanor said as they sat exhausted at the kitchen table. "We need to see them face to face." Rachel looked up from her laptop. "According to this obituary I just found, we can only see one of them. Sophia Martinez died 5 years ago. Cancer." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God." "But Alexander still lives at the address in Dad's records," Rachel continued. "He's 26 now." Eleanor felt a strange mixture of grief for a woman she'd never met and renewed anger at her husband. "Thomas never told me. He must have kept seeing them after she died. We'll drive to Pine Ridge tomorrow," Rachel decided. "I want to see what kind of person gets handed a pharmaceutical empire without ever working a day in it." Sleep eluded Eleanor again that night. She found herself in Thomas's closet at midnight, running her fingers over his suits, inhaling his lingering scent. How could someone she'd known so intimately have hidden such a massive deception? On the top shelf, behind neatly folded sweaters, she discovered a small wooden box she'd never seen before. Inside lay a single key with a tag reading, Lakeshire First National Bank, Box 447. Eleanor slipped the key into her pocket, another piece of the puzzle. Usual. The drive to Pine Ridge the next morning was tense with anticipation. The October landscape blurred past their windows, fiery maples and golden oaks, the beauty of Michigan autumn at its peak. "Have you thought about what you're going to say to him?" Rachel asked as they passed the Pine Ridge city limits sign. Eleanor stared at the GPS. "I've rehearsed a dozen different speeches in my head. None of them seem right." The address from Thomas's records led them to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The house was small but well-maintained, blue siding, white trim, a carefully tended garden that was being prepared for winter. "This is it," Rachel said, parking across the street. "Are you ready?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "No, but I'm going anyway." As they approached the front door, Eleanor felt the familiar tightness in her chest that signaled an oncoming anxiety attack. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each step toward the truth. Rachel rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened to reveal a young man in his mid-20s, tall and lean with dark hair and startlingly familiar eyes. Thomas's eyes, without question. "Alexander Martinez?" Rachel asked, her voice remarkably steady. The young man looked confused. "Yes, can I help you?" Eleanor couldn't speak. The resemblance was undeniable. The shape of his jaw, the slight dimple in his left cheek, the way his eyebrows drew together in confusion. All Thomas. "My name is Rachel Warner," Rachel continued. "This is my mother, Eleanor Warner. Thomas Warner was my father." Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Warner? As in Thomas Warner from Lakeshire?" "Yes," Rachel said. "May we come in? We need to talk." Alexander hesitated, then stepped back. "I guess you'd better." The interior of the house was modest but comfortable. Mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. Walls covered with photographs and artwork. A far cry from the carefully curated perfection of the Warner home. "Please, sit down," Alexander said, gesturing to the couch. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "We're fine," Rachel replied tersely. Eleanor finally found her voice. "You look just like him." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, another gesture so like Thomas that Eleanor felt her heart constrict. "I don't understand why you're here," he said. "Mr. Warner was just my mother's friend. A benefactor, really." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Is that what he told you? That he was a benefactor?" Alexander's expression hardened. "My mother rarely discussed him. I know he helped us financially when things were tough, especially during her illness. He was your father," Eleanor said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Alexander shook his head slowly. "No, that's not possible. My father died before I was born, a car accident. That's what my mother always told me." Rachel pulled out the photographs from Thomas's folder. "These suggest otherwise." Alexander took the photos, his hands shaking slightly. "Where did you get these?" "Thomas's private files," Eleanor explained. "We also found documentation of regular payments to your mother spanning 25 years, and a will naming you as the primary beneficiary of his estate, including controlling interest in Warner Health Pharmaceuticals," Rachel added. Alexander sat down heavily. "What? That can't be right. I never even met him in person. He and my mother only spoke on the phone." Eleanor and Rachel exchanged glances. "You never met Thomas?" Eleanor asked incredulously. "Never." Alexander confirmed. Mom would get calls from him every month, then checks would arrive. After she got sick, the payments increased to cover her medical expenses. After she died, I still received monthly deposits, but I've never spoken to Mr. Warner myself. Rachel leaned forward. Yet somehow, you're inheriting his company and the majority of his fortune. Alexander's expression shifted from shock to defensiveness. I never asked for anything. I didn't even know he died until I received a letter from some lawyer named Blackwood last week, saying I needed to attend a meeting about an inheritance. Blackwood contacted you? Rachel's voice sharpened. What exactly did he say? Just that Mr. Warner had left me something in his will, and that I should come to Lakeshire next week to sign some papers. Alexander stood up, pacing. I was planning to decline. I don't want money I didn't earn, especially from a man who was essentially a stranger. Eleanor watched him move around the room, so much like Thomas in his mannerisms, yet so different in his principles. You wouldn't accept the inheritance? Of course not, Alexander said firmly. I'm a high school science teacher. I make enough to live comfortably. I don't need or want a fortune that should rightfully go to his actual family. He paused, looking directly at Eleanor, which I apparently am, biologically speaking, but you were his wife, his life. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. This young man, this stranger with her husband's eyes, was offering to reject an inheritance worth millions out of a sense of moral rightness. There's something strange about all of this, Rachel said, her legal mind working. If Dad wanted to provide for you, he could have done so without disinheriting us completely. And why would he never have met you if he cared enough to change his will in your favor? Alexander picked up a framed photograph from a side table. This is the only picture I have of my mother with Mr. Warner. He handed it to Eleanor. The photo showed a much younger Sophia standing next to Thomas outside what appeared to be a laboratory. Both wore white coats with the Warner Health logo visible on the breast pocket. Your mother worked at Warner Health? Eleanor asked, surprised. 25 years ago, briefly, Alexander confirmed. She was a research chemist. She never talked much about that job, just that she left to raise me on her own. Rachel took the photo, studying it. This doesn't look like a romantic relationship. This looks like colleagues. Mom kept a box of papers in the attic, Alexander said slowly. Letters, documents from her time at Warner Health. I never went through them after she died. It felt too private. We need to see those papers, Rachel said urgently. Alexander nodded. I'll get them. While he was upstairs, Eleanor wandered around the living room, taking in the life Sophia Martinez had built. Photos of Alexander growing up, school plays, graduation, science fairs, a life Thomas had paid for but never participated in. Found it, Alexander called, returning with a dusty cardboard box. They gathered around the coffee table as he removed the lid. Inside were stacks of correspondence, old paycheck stubs from Warner Health, and a leather-bound journal. Rachel picked up a folder labeled Nexafan Trial Results, Confidential. Nexafan was Dad's breakthrough drug, she said, opening the folder. It's a pain reliever for arthritis patients. It's Warner Health's biggest seller. Eleanor picked up the journal, opening to a page marked with a red ribbon. April 15th, 1998. I can't keep silent anymore. The secondary trial results clearly show liver damage in 8% of patients, yet Thomas insists on burying the data. Acceptable risk, he calls it. There's nothing acceptable about knowingly harming people. I've told him I'll go to the FDA if he doesn't pull the application. Eleanor's hand shook as she turned the page. April 20th, 1998. Thomas came to my apartment today. He offered me money to stay quiet. A consulting fee, he called it. When I refused, he threatened me, said no one would believe me over him, that he'd make sure I never worked in pharmaceutical research again. I'm scared, but I can't be part of this. May 3, 1998. The pregnancy test was positive. I haven't told Thomas. I can't bring a child into this nightmare, but I don't see a way out. Eleanor looked up, her world shifting yet again. Sophia wasn't Thomas's lover. She was a whistleblower who threatened to expose problems with Nexafan. Rachel was scanning documents rapidly. These reports show significant liver damage in the trial patients that wasn't disclosed in the final FDA submission. Alexander took the journal from Eleanor's hands, reading entries his mother had written decades ago. She was going to expose Warner Health for falsifying drug safety data? Eleanor continued reading aloud from later entries. July 15, 1998. Thomas came again today. He knows about the pregnancy. Somehow, he's convinced himself the baby is his, though we never. He's offering financial support in exchange for my silence. I'm 3 months along now, no job prospects, and running out of options. What choice do I have? August 2, 1998. I've made a deal with the devil. Thomas will provide for me and the baby as long as I never speak about Nexafan. He's convinced himself this child is his, perhaps to justify his conscience. I've agreed to let him believe it. The alternative is poverty for my child. Rachel sat back, stunned. So Alexander isn't actually Dad's son? Alexander's face had gone pale. My mother let him believe he was my father to secure financial support, and he paid her off to keep quiet about the drug's side effects. Eleanor whispered. Nexafan is Warner Health's flagship product. It generates over $800 million in annual revenue. Rachel was putting pieces together rapidly. If these documents ever became public, Warner Health would face massive lawsuits, regulatory penalties. The company would collapse, Eleanor finished. Alexander closed the journal, his expression troubled. My entire life has been funded by hush money. And now Thomas has left you controlling interest in the company, Rachel said. Why? After all these years, why change his will 6 months ago? Eleanor remembered the bank keys she'd found. We need to check that safety deposit box. Thomas left something there, something important enough to hide. Alexander stood up. I'm coming with you back to Lakeshire. I need to understand what's really happening. Eleanor looked at this young man, not her husband's son after all, but someone whose life had been irreversibly shaped by Thomas's choices. There's something bigger going on here, she said, and we have 27 days to figure it out. The drive back to Lakeshire was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Alexander sat in the back seat, still processing the revelation that his entire life had been built on a foundation of lies, not just Thomas's, but his mother's as well. I always wondered why she was so secretive about my father, he said as they crossed the county line. She'd get these phone calls, and afterward she'd lock herself in her bedroom and cry. Eleanor watched him in the rearview mirror. Despite not being Thomas's biological son, there was something in his intensity, his thoughtfulness, that reminded her of the man she thought she'd married. Your mother protected you the best way she knew how, she said gently. Rachel, ever practical, was making calls to her legal contacts. We need to get to that bank first thing tomorrow, she said after hanging up. And I've requested access to Warner Health's complete records on Nexafan. As a shareholder, Mom has the right to review them. When they arrived at the Warner home, Alexander hesitated at the entrance, taking in the grandeur with obvious discomfort. I can get a hotel room, he offered. Nonsense, Eleanor said, surprising herself with her firmness. You're involved in this now. You should stay here. As Rachel showed Alexander to the guest room, Eleanor retreated to Thomas's office. She sat at his desk, surrounded by the trappings of the man she'd thought she knew, and opened her laptop. She typed Nexafan side effects into the search bar. The results made her blood run cold. Dozens of news articles, forum posts, and medical studies discussing liver failure, kidney damage, and even deaths potentially linked to the drug. Class action lawsuits that had been quietly settled out of court. Testimonials from patients whose lives had been destroyed. Yet Warner Health had consistently denied any causal relationship, pointing to their FDA-approved studies that showed minimal risk. Studies that Sophia Martinez had claimed were falsified. Eleanor was still reading when Rachel entered. "Alexander settled in," Rachel said, then noticed Eleanor's expression. "What is it?" "Nexafan has hurt people, Rachel, possibly killed them." Eleanor turned the screen so Rachel could see. Hundreds of cases, maybe thousands. Rachel scanned the information, her face growing pale. If Sophia's documents are authentic, Dad knew about these risks from the beginning. "And paid her to keep quiet," Eleanor added. "That's not the Thomas I thought I knew." "Money changes people," Rachel said bitterly. "So does power." Alexander appeared in the doorway, holding his mother's journal. "I've been reading more entries. In her later years, Mom wrote that she regretted her silence, that she felt responsible for every person harmed by Nexafan. But she never came forward," Rachel pointed out. "She was protecting me," Alexander said quietly. The agreement with Thomas specified that if she ever spoke out, all financial support would end immediately. She was a single mother with a chronic illness. She couldn't risk it. Eleanor closed her laptop. "Tomorrow we visit the bank. Then we go to Warner Health headquarters. It's time to find out exactly what Thomas was hiding." Lakeshore First National Bank was housed in a stately brick building downtown. The morning sun glinted off its brass fixtures as Eleanor, Rachel, and Alexander approached the entrance. Eleanor's anxiety surged as they entered the crowded lobby. She hated public places, hated the feeling of eyes on her. Thomas had always handled their banking, shielding her from these interactions. "Mom, are you okay?" Rachel asked, noticing her hesitation. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'm fine. Let's do this." At the safe deposit box counter, she presented her identification and the key. The bank officer, a middle-aged woman with a practiced smile, checked her records. "Mrs. Warner, this box was accessed by your husband just 2 weeks before his passing," she informed them as she led them to a private viewing room. 2 weeks? Rachel exchanged glances with Eleanor. That was right after his diagnosis. The bank officer unlocked the box and discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone with whatever secrets Thomas had deemed important enough to secure. Inside the metal box lay a single USB drive and a sealed envelope with Eleanor's name written in Thomas's precise handwriting. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the letter. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've discovered truths I never had the courage to share in life. For that cowardice, I can never be forgiven. 25 years ago, I made a decision that compromised everything I claimed to value: truth, integrity, the oath to do no harm. When Sophia Martinez brought me evidence that Nexafan caused serious liver damage in a significant percentage of patients, I buried it. The company was struggling. This drug was our future. I convinced myself the risks were acceptable, that the benefits outweighed the harm. Sophia threatened to expose everything. I panicked. I paid her to keep quiet, fabricating a paternity claim to justify the payments to myself and others. It was never romantic. She was a colleague who stood on principle while I abandoned mine. The USB contains all the original trial data, communications proving we knowingly falsified safety reports, and a list of victims who were never properly compensated. I've kept these records updated over the years. My private penance. Why am I telling you this now? Because Warner Health is about to be acquired by Thornton Pharmaceuticals. They've discovered irregularities in our historical data and are demanding complete control to bury the evidence permanently. Gregory Blackwood is working with them. The will is part of their scheme. Alexander Martinez becomes the perfect scapegoat if the truth emerges. I never meant to hurt you or Rachel. Everything I did, including this final deception, was to protect you from the consequences of my actions. With love and deepest regret, Thomas Eleanor passed the letter to Rachel, unable to speak. Alexander looked over Rachel's shoulder as she read. He was setting me up to take the fall, Alexander said, his voice hollow. If the truth about Nexafan came out, I'd be the new owner, the one responsible. Rachel plugged the USB drive into her phone. These files. There's evidence of at least 347 deaths directly attributable to Nexafan's undisclosed side effects, and a pending acquisition by Thornton Pharmaceuticals, Eleanor added, finding her voice. Scheduled to close in 26 days, Rachel finished, checking the documents. 1 day before Alexander would officially take control. Alexander paced the small room. So Gregory Blackwood is working with Thornton to bury all this evidence and shield them from liability. Eleanor felt a strange calm settling over her. The Thomas she'd known hadn't been having an affair after all. He'd been a different kind of sinner, a man who'd compromised his ethics for profit, who'd hidden his transgressions behind charitable support. Yet in his final days, facing mortality, he'd created a path to the truth. We have the evidence now, she said. We can stop this. Rachel's expression was grim. It won't be that simple. Thornton Pharmaceuticals is one of the largest companies in the country. They'll have legal teams ready to discredit these documents, to discredit us. And Gregory Blackwood controls everything until the will is executed, Alexander pointed out. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, surprising herself with her resolve. Then we need to find more evidence, build an ironclad case they can't dismiss, and we need to do it before that acquisition goes through. Where do we start? Alexander asked. Warner Health headquarters, Eleanor decided. Thomas's executive office. If he kept backup evidence anywhere, it would be there. Mom, Rachel said carefully, are you sure you're up for this? You've never been comfortable with confrontation, and this is going to mean facing a lot of powerful people. Eleanor thought of the 29 years she'd spent avoiding difficult situations, letting Thomas shield her from discomfort, how that avoidance had left her vulnerable, unprepared. I don't have a choice, she said firmly. People have died because of Nexafan. More will die if we don't act. As they left the bank, Eleanor noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its driver watching them intently. We're being followed, she murmured to Rachel. Then we're on the right track, Rachel replied. The clock is ticking. Warner Health Pharmaceuticals occupied a sleek glass and steel building on the outskirts of Lakeshore, its 6 stories rising from meticulously landscaped grounds. Thomas had spared no expense in creating a headquarters that projected success and stability. Eleanor hadn't visited in over a year. As Thomas's condition worsened, he'd worked from home, then not at all. Now, approaching the main entrance with Rachel and Alexander, she felt like an imposter. Mrs. Warner! The receptionist, Diane, if Eleanor remembered correctly, stood as they entered. We weren't expecting you today. It was a last-minute decision, Eleanor replied, summoning a composure she didn't feel. I'd like to visit my husband's office. There are some personal items I'd like to retrieve. Of course, Diane said, though her eyes darted nervously to the elevator. I should call Mr. Blackwood first. He's in a board meeting upstairs. That won't be necessary, Rachel interjected smoothly. My mother is still a major shareholder. She doesn't need permission to access her husband's office. Diane hesitated, then pushed a button under her desk. Seconds later, a security guard appeared. "Please escort Mrs. Warner and her companions to Mr. Warner's office," she instructed. The security guard, his nameplate read Jenkins, nodded respectfully to Eleanor. "This way, ma'am." As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Eleanor's anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. The confined space, the impending confrontation, the magnitude of what they were attempting. It was almost too much. Alexander noticed her distress and quietly offered her a mint. "My mom used to say sucking on something sweet helps calm the nerves," he whispered. Something about the sensory distraction. Eleanor accepted gratefully, touched by the gesture. Thomas's corner office remained exactly as he'd left it. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Lakeshire. Awards and photographs lined the walls. Thomas receiving recognition from medical associations, shaking hands with politicians, always the picture of success and integrity. "We don't have much time," Rachel said, closing the door behind them. "The board meeting could end any minute." "What exactly are we looking for?" Alexander asked, surveying the spacious office. "Anything that might corroborate the data on the USB drive," Rachel replied. "Additional documents, correspondence, anything that links the company leadership to knowledge of Nexafan's dangers." Eleanor moved to Thomas's desk, running her hand along its polished surface. For 25 years, he'd sat here building his pharmaceutical empire while secretly paying off Sophia Martinez. "His computer," she said, indicating the sleek monitor on the desk. Rachel sat in Thomas's chair and wiggled the mouse. "Password protected, of course." Eleanor thought for a moment. "Try Emily Rachel 0722. Rachel typed it in. "Access denied." "What about Sophia Alex 0433? Alexander suggested grimly. "Access denied." Eleanor noticed a small antique clock on the desk, a gift she'd given Thomas on their first anniversary. The hands were frozen at 3:47. "Try 3:47, she said suddenly. The number of deaths from Nexafan according to his files. Rachel typed it in. The screen unlocked. "How did you know?" Alexander asked, impressed. Eleanor pointed to the clock. Thomas was meticulous about keeping that clock running. He would never have left it stopped unless it was intentional. They quickly searched through Thomas's files, finding nothing immediately useful. His email contained only routine business correspondence from the past few months. He was too smart to leave evidence on a company computer, Rachel sighed, frustrated. Eleanor picked up the antique clock, turning it over in her hands. The battery compartment seemed unusually large. "Wait," she said, her fingers finding a hidden catch on the bottom of the clock. The false bottom of the battery compartment slid open, revealing a tiny USB drive. "He left breadcrumbs," Alexander said, taking the drive from Eleanor and plugging it into the computer. The drive contained a single video file. Rachel double-clicked to open it. Thomas's face filled the screen. He looked gaunt, his skin yellowed from liver failure, a cruel irony given what they now knew about Nexafan. "Eleanor," he began, his voice raspy. "If you're watching this, you found the letter in the safe deposit box and followed the trail here. I always knew your intuition was sharper than you gave yourself credit for." Eleanor felt tears well in her eyes at the sight of her husband, recorded just days before his death. "What you've discovered about Nexafan is just the beginning," Thomas continued. 25 years ago, I made a terrible choice. I prioritized the company's success over patient safety. I've tried to justify it to myself ever since, telling myself the good we've done outweighs the harm, but I can't maintain that lie anymore. Thomas coughed violently before continuing. "Thornton Pharmaceuticals approached me 6 months ago about an acquisition. During their due diligence, they discovered irregularities in our Nexafan trial data. Instead of exposing us, they saw an opportunity. Thornton has its own problems with Cardiolex. their heart medication. They wanted to acquire Warner Health, merge our problems with theirs, and create legal distance through corporate restructuring. He leaned closer to the camera. Gregory Blackwood has been working with them from the beginning. The amended will naming Alexander Martinez as my heir is part of their strategy. If investigations ever pierce the corporate veil, Alexander becomes the scapegoat, the outsider who took control just before the problems were discovered. Eleanor gasped. The plan was even more sinister than they'd imagined. What you need is on this drive, Thomas continued, but it's encrypted. You'll need help to access it, someone you can trust who understands pharmaceutical research. Thomas paused, his eyes filling with regret. I failed you, Eleanor. I failed our family. I failed as a scientist and a human being. But you don't have to accept my failure as the final word. There's one person who might help you, Dr. James Wilson, Sophia's former research partner. He left Warner Health the same week she did. Find him. The video ended abruptly. Eleanor, Rachel, and Alexander sat in stunned silence. We need to find this Dr. Wilson, Alexander said finally, and we need to copy these files before, Rachel began, but was interrupted by the office door swinging open. Gregory Blackwood stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards and a tall, severe-looking woman in an expensive suit. Mrs. Warner, Gregory said, his voice icily polite. What a surprise to find you here. Eleanor instinctively pocketed the tiny USB drive from the clock as Rachel quickly closed the video window on the computer. I'm collecting some personal items, Eleanor replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. The woman beside Gregory stepped forward. Mrs. Warner, I'm Victoria Thornton, CEO of Thornton Pharmaceuticals. I'm sorry for your loss, but I must ask what you're doing accessing company files without authorization. Rachel stood. My mother is still a major shareholder. She has every right to be here. Gregory's smile didn't reach his eyes. Not according to the estate freeze I implemented yesterday. Until the will is executed, all of Thomas's assets, including his shares, are under the control of the estate, of which I am the executor. Eleanor felt trapped, cornered. Her chest tightened painfully. Victoria Thornton checked her watch. I have a board meeting to return to. Mr. Blackwood, please handle this situation. As she left, Gregory signaled to the security guards. Please escort Mrs. Warner and her companions from the building and confiscate any company property they may have taken. We haven't taken anything, Rachel protested as one guard moved toward the computer. Alexander stepped forward, drawing attention to himself. I'm Alexander Martinez. I believe I'm about to become the majority owner of this company. Is this how you treat your future boss, Mr. Blackwood? The calculated move gave Eleanor precious seconds to slip the USB drive deeper into her pocket. The guard checking the computer found nothing suspicious, as Rachel had closed all incriminating files. Future ownership is not current ownership, Gregory replied coldly, and unauthorized access to company systems is a serious offense. As they were escorted from the building, Eleanor's mind raced. They had the USB drive from the clock, but it was encrypted. They needed to find Dr. James Wilson, and quickly. They'll be watching us now, Rachel said as they reached their car. That black sedan from the bank is here too. We need to split up, Alexander suggested. I'll create a diversion. You two find Dr. Wilson. Eleanor shook her head. No, we stay together. Thomas manipulated people by keeping them isolated, compartmentalizing information. We won't make the same mistake. Rachel started the car. First, we need a secure place to examine that USB drive. My apartment has better computer security than the house. As they pulled away from Warner Health headquarters, Eleanor glanced back at the gleaming building her husband had built. She'd once been so proud of his success, never questioning the foundation it was built upon. Now she knew better, and she had just 15 days to expose the truth before Thornton Pharmaceuticals buried it forever. And Rachel's apartment in downtown Lakeshire was a stark contrast to the Warner family home, minimalist, functional, with the impersonal feel of a space more visited than lived in. Her recent divorce had left emotional scars that manifested in bare walls and empty shelves. I can run some basic decryption programs, she said, booting up her laptop. But if it's serious encryption, we'll need a specialist. Alexander explored the kitchenette, automatically making coffee as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. While that's running, I'll see what I can find on Dr. James Wilson. Eleanor sat at the window, watching the street below for signs of surveillance. The black sedan was nowhere in sight, but she felt exposed nonetheless. Here, Alexander said, handing her a steaming mug. You look like you could use this. Eleanor accepted gratefully. Thank you. She studied him briefly. You're remarkably calm for someone who just discovered his entire life was built on a lie. Alexander leaned against the windowsill. I'm a science teacher. I believe in following evidence where it leads, even when the truth is uncomfortable. He smiled ruefully. Besides, I had a good mother. She may have lied about my paternity, but she taught me integrity in everything else. Found him, Rachel called from her computer. Dr. James Wilson. He left Warner Health 25 years ago and now runs a small research facility in Harbor Springs, about 2 hours north of here. And the USB? Eleanor asked. Rachel shook her head. Military-grade encryption. We definitely need help. Alexander looked over her shoulder at the screen. We should call him first. Make sure he's willing to help before we drive all the way there. Rachel found a contact number and dialed, putting the call on speaker. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Wilson Research, James speaking. Dr. Wilson, Rachel began. My name is Rachel Warner. I'm Thomas Warner's daughter. A long pause followed. Thomas Warner's daughter, he repeated slowly. Why are you calling me after all these years? My father passed away recently, Rachel explained. He left information suggesting you might help us with a matter concerning Nexafan. Another pause. Is this line secure? No, Rachel admitted. Then I can't help you, Wilson replied curtly. Before he could hang up, Eleanor leaned toward the speaker. Dr. Wilson, I'm Eleanor Warner, Thomas's wife. Sophia Martinez was right about Nexafan. People have died. Thomas confirmed it before he died. A sharp intake of breath came through the speaker. Meet me at the Lighthouse Cafe in Harbor Springs tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone. No phones. The line went dead. Alexander looked troubled. He seems paranoid. With good reason, Rachel said. If what we suspect is true, Thornton Pharmaceuticals would go to great lengths to keep this quiet. Eleanor felt the weight of the tiny USB drive in her pocket. We should leave now. They'll be monitoring my house and possibly your apartment, too. Where can we go that's safe? Alexander asked. Eleanor thought for a moment. Thomas had a fishing cabin on Lake Charlevoix. Few people know about it. We can stay there tonight, then meet Wilson in the morning. As they gathered essential supplies, Eleanor's phone rang. The caller ID showed Gregory Blackwood. Should I answer? She asked. Rachel nodded. Put it on speaker, but be careful what you say. Eleanor answered. Hello, Gregory. Eleanor. His voice was smooth as silk. I want to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier today. Security protocols can be so impersonal. It's fine, Eleanor replied neutrally. I'm calling because we've scheduled a meeting with Alexander Martinez to discuss the transition of ownership. As a courtesy, I wanted to invite you and Rachel to attend tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at Warner Health headquarters. Eleanor met Rachel's eyes. The same time as their meeting with Dr. Wilson. I'll have to check our schedule, Eleanor hedged. We have several appointments with the funeral home about Thomas's memorial service. Of course, Gregory replied. But I should mention, this meeting will include discussion of the ongoing financial support for you and Rachel. Your presence would be advantageous to your interests. The threat was thinly veiled. Attend, or risk losing what little financial security remained. We'll try to make it, Eleanor said non-committally. Excellent. Oh, and Eleanor? The board is quite concerned about company confidentiality. Any unauthorized sharing of Warner Health information could have serious legal consequences for everyone involved. After hanging up, Alexander looked grim. They're trying to keep us from meeting Wilson, which means we're on the right track, Rachel said, packing her laptop. We should go now, before they decide to take more direct action. As they headed to the car, Eleanor felt her phone vibrate with a text message. It was from an unknown number. Your husband killed my wife with his poison. 347 deaths and counting. Tick-tock, Mrs. Warner. The truth is coming out one way or another. Eleanor showed the message to Rachel and Alexander. Someone else knows, Alexander said quietly. And they think we're part of the cover-up, Rachel added. Eleanor pocketed her phone, her resolve strengthening. Then we need to prove them wrong. We have 14 days to expose the truth before Thornton Pharmaceuticals buries it forever. As they drove toward Lake Charlevoix, the mid-October sunset painted the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. Eleanor watched the familiar landscape of her life recede in the rearview mirror, replaced by uncertainty and danger. Yet somehow, she felt more alive than she had in years. The anxiety that had defined her life still lurked within her, but alongside it grew something new, a determination to face the truth, no matter how painful. Thomas had lived a lie. She would not die with one. The Warner fishing cabin sat on a wooded lot overlooking Lake Charlevoix, its weathered cedar exterior blending with the surrounding pines. Thomas had purchased it early in their marriage, envisioning family weekends of fishing and relaxation. In reality, he'd rarely found time to visit, always too busy building Warner Health. Now Eleanor wondered how many of his fishing trips had actually been visits to Sophia and Alexander in Pine Ridge. It's beautiful, Alexander said as they unloaded the car. The cabin's interior was rustic but comfortable. Stone fireplace, knotty pine walls, simple furniture built to last. Thomas loved it here, Eleanor replied, running her hand along the back of a handcrafted chair. Or at least, I thought he did. Rachel checked the windows and doors, her attorney's mind focused on security. No alarm system, but the isolation works in our favor. We should be safe for tonight. Alexander built a fire while Eleanor prepared a simple dinner from the supplies they'd purchased on the way. As they ate, they reviewed what they knew. Nexafan causes liver damage in a significant percentage of patients, Rachel summarized. Dad and the company knew this 25 years ago, but concealed the data. Sophia Martinez threatened to expose them, so Dad paid her off with a fabricated paternity claim to justify the payments. Meanwhile, Thornton Pharmaceuticals has its own problem drug called Cardiolex, Alexander continued. They discovered Warner Health's Nexafan cover-up during acquisition talks and saw an opportunity to bury both issues through corporate restructuring. And they're using you as the potential fall guy, Rachel added, nodding to Alexander, the outsider who suddenly inherits control of the company just before problems emerge. Eleanor stared into the fire. What I don't understand is why Thomas changed his will 6 months ago. If he knew what Thornton was planning, why play into their hands? Maybe he didn't have a choice, Alexander suggested. Or maybe he was setting up a different kind of trap, one that would expose everything. By making me the heir, ensuring I'd discover the truth and fight back, Eleanor murmured. He knew I'd never accept his betrayal without question. Rachel opened her laptop. The question now is, what exactly is on this encrypted USB drive, and will Dr. Wilson help us access it? We should get some rest, Eleanor said, noticing the exhaustion on their faces. Tomorrow will be challenging. That night, Eleanor lay awake in the cabin's small bedroom, listening to the wind in the pines and the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore. She thought about Thomas, the man she'd married, the man she'd thought she knew, and the man he'd actually been. Had he loved her? She believed so. But he'd loved success more, had compromised his integrity for it, had built their comfortable life on a foundation of suffering. The text message she'd received kept replaying in her mind. Your husband killed my wife with his poison. How many families had been devastated by Nexophan's hidden dangers? How many had blamed themselves, never knowing the truth? Eleanor drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of Thomas standing on the shore of Lake Charlevoix, trying to tell her something she couldn't quite hear over the roar of the waves. Harbor Springs greeted them with postcard-perfect views of Little Traverse Bay, its historic downtown lined with boutiques and cafes catering to tourists and wealthy summer residents. The Lighthouse Cafe sat at the end of Main Street, its large windows offering panoramic views of the harbor. Following Dr. Wilson's instructions, they'd left their phones in the car. Eleanor felt naked without hers, another small anxiety to add to the growing mountain of discomfort. Dr. James Wilson sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, watching the door. At 68, he remained fit, with a full head of silver hair and piercing blue eyes that assessed them carefully as they approached. Mrs. Warner, he said, standing to greet Eleanor, you look just as Thomas described you. Eleanor wasn't sure how to respond to that. Thank you for meeting us, Dr. Wilson. James, please. He nodded to Rachel and Alexander. And these are? My daughter Rachel and Alexander Martinez, Sophia's son. Wilson's eyebrows shot up. Sophia's boy? My God, you're the spitting image of her. He gestured for them to sit. I assume you know the truth about your parentage? Alexander nodded grimly. That Thomas Warner wasn't my father? Yes, we've recently discovered that. Wilson signaled the waitress for coffee, then leaned forward. I've been waiting 25 years for this day. Sophia always said the truth would come out eventually. You stayed in touch with her? Eleanor asked. Until her death, yes. We were close colleagues and friends. Wilson's expression softened. She was brilliant, principled. What Warner Health did to her was unconscionable. What exactly happened? Rachel asked. We've pieced together parts of the story, but we need to understand everything. Wilson glanced around the cafe before speaking. Sophia and I were part of the research team that developed Nexophan. During Phase 3 trials, we noticed a disturbing pattern of elevated liver enzymes in a subset of patients. When we brought this to Thomas's attention, he initially seemed concerned, but as launch dates approached and investment pressure mounted, his attitude changed. The waitress arrived with coffee, forcing a pause in the conversation. After she left, Wilson continued more quietly. Thomas ordered the trial data reanalyzed, excluding certain patient groups that showed the worst reactions. When Sophia objected, she was removed from the project. When she threatened to go to the FDA, she was terminated with a generous severance package tied to an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. But she was pregnant, Alexander said, with another man's child. Wilson nodded. Yes. She never told me who the father was, only that he wasn't in the picture. When Thomas discovered her pregnancy, he convinced himself the child was his, despite the impossibility. It gave him a way to justify continued payments to keep her quiet, payments that wouldn't raise eyebrows if ever discovered. And you? Eleanor asked. Why did you leave? I was given a choice, sign the same NDA, or be blacklisted throughout the industry. I had a family to support, So I signed, but I couldn't continue working there. I started my own small research firm instead, taking contract work that allowed me to sleep at night. Rachel leaned forward. We found evidence suggesting at least 347 deaths directly attributable to Nexafan's side effects. Wilson's face darkened. That number is conservative. The problem with Nexafan is that its liver toxicity presents gradually, often misdiagnosed as other conditions. The true toll is likely much higher. Eleanor removed the tiny USB drive from her pocket. Thomas left this for us to find, but it's encrypted. In his final message, he suggested you might help us access it. Wilson stared at the drive. After all these years, Thomas finally grew a conscience. He took it carefully. I can try to decrypt it, but it will take time. What's your deadline? 14 days, Rachel replied. That's when Thornton Pharmaceuticals completes their acquisition of Warner Health. Wilson pocketed the drive. I know someone who can help, a former NSA cryptographer who now works in pharmaceutical security. If anyone can crack this quickly, it's her. There's more, Eleanor said, explaining the amended will, Alexander's unexpected inheritance, and Thornton's apparent scheme to use him as a scapegoat. Wilson listened intently, his expression growing grimmer. Victoria Thornton is known for aggressive acquisition tactics, but this is beyond unethical. It's criminal. We need to stop the acquisition, Rachel stated, but we need irrefutable evidence, which hopefully is on that drive, Alexander added. Wilson checked his watch. I'll get started on the decryption immediately. Where can I contact you when I have results? Eleanor gave him the address of the cabin. We can't use our phones. We think they may be monitored. Wise precaution, Wilson agreed. I'll come to you directly once we've made progress. Give me 3 days. As they parted outside the cafe, Wilson took Eleanor's hand. Thomas was my friend once, before greed corrupted him. I'm sorry he betrayed your trust, Eleanor. Eleanor felt tears threatening. Did he ever mention me during those years? Wilson's expression softened. Often. He kept your photo on his desk even then. He loved you, Eleanor, in his broken way. That doesn't excuse what he did, but I believe it's true. As they walked back to their car, Eleanor's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. The Thomas who had protected her from discomfort, who had held her through panic attacks, who had loved her for 29 years. That man had simultaneously been capable of decisions that cost hundreds of lives. Now we wait, Rachel said as they drove back toward the cabin. But waiting proved impossible. That evening, as they listened to the local news on the cabin's old radio, a report caught their attention. Warner Health Pharmaceuticals announced today an accelerated timeline for its acquisition by Thornton Pharmaceuticals. In a statement, Warner Health's interim CEO, Gregory Blackwood, cited market conditions for moving the closing date forward to next week. Rachel switched off the radio. They're speeding up the process. They must know we're on to them. 9 days, Alexander calculated. We now have 9 days before the acquisition closes. Eleanor paced the small living room. We can't just wait for Wilson. We need to gather more evidence on our own. But where? Rachel asked. Warner Health headquarters is off limits to us now. Eleanor stopped pacing, a memory surfacing. Not all the records would be at headquarters. Thomas kept backup files of everything important. He was paranoid about data loss after a server crash in the early days nearly destroyed the company. Where would these backups be? Alexander asked. In our home, Eleanor replied. He had a secure server in the basement. I never paid attention to it. Technology was his domain, not mine. Rachel grabbed her car keys. Then we need to go back to the house, now while we still can. It's risky, Alexander warned. They'll be watching the house. Which is why I should go alone, Eleanor decided. They'll expect me to return home eventually. One person will attract less attention than 3. Rachel immediately objected. Mom, you can't. It's too dangerous. I'm the only one who knows where to look, Eleanor insisted, surprising herself with her determination. And I'm tired of being protected, of being treated as too fragile to handle difficult situations. That ends now. The fire in Eleanor's eyes silenced further protests. They developed a plan. Eleanor would return home under the pretense of collecting more personal items, locate the server backup, and return to the cabin. If I'm not back by morning, contact this reporter, Rachel said, writing down a name. She covered the initial Nexafan approval. She might help if things go wrong. Eleanor tucked the paper into her pocket, alongside the cabin key and Thomas's letter. I'll be fine, she assured them, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. The drive back to Lakeshire passed in tense silence. Eleanor dropped Rachel and Alexander at a motel on the outskirts of town. They couldn't risk returning to the house together before continuing alone to the Warner family home. As expected, a dark sedan was parked across the street, watching the house. Eleanor drove past it, pulled into her driveway, and walked to her front door with deliberate normalcy, as if she hadn't noticed the surveillance. Inside, the house felt different. No longer a sanctuary, but a repository of secrets. Eleanor moved through the familiar rooms, turning on lights as if preparing to stay the night. She made a show of collecting clothes and toiletries, all while planning her approach to the basement server. The security panel for the basement required a 6-digit code. Thomas had changed it regularly, paranoid about security breaches. What would his final code have been? Eleanor tried their anniversary date. Access denied. Rachel's birthday. Access denied. She paused, thinking about what she now knew of Thomas's final months. The number of Nexafan victims he'd documented. 347. She entered 347347. The panel flashed green. Access granted. The basement server room was small but state-of-the-art, climate-controlled and humming with equipment. Eleanor had rarely ventured here. This had been Thomas's domain, mysterious and slightly intimidating. A desktop computer sat on a small desk. Eleanor powered it on, praying she could figure out how to access what she needed. Password protected, of course. She tried the same number, 347347. The system unlocked. On the desktop was a folder labeled simply Insurance. Eleanor clicked it open to find thousands of files, emails, reports, financial records, spanning decades of Warner Health's history. She inserted a portable hard drive she'd brought and began copying the files. The progress bar moved agonizingly slowly. 15%, 27%, 38%. Upstairs, the front door opened. Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. Footsteps moved across the foyer, deliberate and unhurried. "Eleanor?" Gregory Blackwood's voice called out. "Are you home?" The file transfer continued. 45%, 52%. She had to buy time. Eleanor quickly closed the basement door and hurried upstairs. "Gregory," she said, feigning surprise as she emerged from the kitchen. "How did you get in?" He held up a key. "Thomas gave me a spare years ago, for emergencies." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "When I saw your car in the driveway, I thought I'd check on you. You left our meeting rather abruptly yesterday." "I needed some time alone," Eleanor replied, fighting to keep her voice steady, "to process everything." Gregory glanced around the foyer. "Is Rachel with you, or perhaps your new friend, Mr. Martinez?" "I'm alone." Eleanor moved toward the living room, drawing him away from the basement door. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you." Gregory followed her. "I actually came to discuss the will. There may be a way to arrange a more equitable distribution, despite Thomas's final wishes." Eleanor's mind raced. Was he offering a bribe? "I'm listening." Thornton Pharmaceuticals values family legacy. They might be persuaded to create a position for Rachel in the merged company, with appropriate compensation. Gregory adjusted his cufflinks. "In exchange for your discretion regarding certain historical matters." Historical matters? Eleanor echoed. Corporate archives, old research data, that sort of thing. Gregory's gaze sharpened. Material that, taken out of context, might be misinterpreted. He knew. Somehow, he knew they'd discovered the truth about Nexafan. I haven't been going through archives, Eleanor said carefully. I've been focused on personal matters since Thomas's death. Of course, Gregory nodded, not believing her for a second. Nevertheless, the offer stands. Rachel's future could be secured with one simple decision, to honor Thomas's legacy rather than tarnish it. Before Eleanor could respond, her phone rang. It was Rachel. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, answering. "Hello?" "Mom?" Rachel's voice was tense. "There's a problem. Alexander is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Eleanor asked, conscious of Gregory watching her. "He went to get food and never came back. His room's been searched. I think they've taken him." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I'll call you back," she managed, ending the call. Gregory smiled thinly. "Problem?" "Nothing important," Eleanor lied. "About this offer, I'd need time to consider it." "Of course," Gregory stood. "But I should mention that time is of the essence. The acquisition timeline has been accelerated." "So I heard," Eleanor replied. "Why the rush?" Gregory shrugged elegantly. "Market conditions, regulatory concerns, the usual corporate pressures." He moved toward the door. "I'll expect your answer within 48 hours, Eleanor. For everyone's sake, I hope it's the right one." After he left, Eleanor rushed to the basement. The file transfer had completed 100%. She quickly shut down the system, pocketed the hard drive, and headed for the door. As she reached her car, her phone rang again. "Rachel," she answered urgently. "I'm on my way. I got what we needed." "Mrs. Warner," an unfamiliar male voice replied. "This isn't Rachel, but I do have something that belongs to you." Eleanor's hand tightened on her car door. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows the truth about Nexafan. Someone who lost everything because of your husband's greed." "Where is Alexander?" Eleanor demanded. "Safe for now, as is your daughter." The voice hardened. "If you want them to stay that way, bring Thomas Warner's evidence to Lakeside Park. Midnight. Come alone." The call ended. Eleanor stood frozen beside her car, terror washing over her. Rachel and Alexander, both taken. By whom? Gregory Blackwood? Thornton Pharmaceuticals? Or this mystery caller with a personal vendetta? She checked her watch. 9:47 p.m. Just over 2 hours until the midnight meeting. Eleanor slid into her car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely insert the key. The familiar wave of anxiety threatened to overwhelm her, chest tightening, breath shortening, vision tunneling. Not now. She couldn't afford a panic attack now. Eleanor forced herself to breathe deeply, counting each inhale and exhale as her therapist had taught her years ago. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. Gradually, the tightness in her chest eased. Rachel and Alexander needed her. After a lifetime of being protected, of avoiding conflict, of letting her anxiety define her limitations, Eleanor Warner had to become the protector. She started the car and pulled away from the house, the hard drive secure in her pocket. As she drove, she formulated a plan. She wouldn't face this threat alone, despite the warning. She needed help. 20 minutes later, Eleanor parked outside a modest apartment building on Lakeshire's east side. She checked the address Rachel had given her and retry A, next edit. 20 minutes later, Eleanor parked outside a modest apartment building on Lakeshire's east side. She checked the address Rachel had given her and approached apartment 3B, knocking firmly. The door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Can I help you?" "Diane Morgan? I'm Eleanor Warner. My daughter Rachel suggested I contact you." Recognition flickered across the woman's face. "Thomas Warner's widow? What can I do for you at this hour?" "I need your help. It's about Nexafan." Diane's expression hardened. She glanced down the hallway before pulling Eleanor inside and locking the door behind her. I've been waiting 20 years for someone from Warner Health to say that name to me, she said quietly. I was a junior reporter when Nexafan was approved. I raised questions about the trial data that no one wanted to answer. It nearly ended my career. Now it might save my daughter's life, Eleanor replied, quickly explaining the situation, the hidden evidence, Thomas's confession, the kidnapping, and the midnight deadline. Diane listened intently, her reporter's mind clearly connecting dots. This goes beyond corporate malfeasance. This is criminal conspiracy, kidnapping, possibly murder. I know, Eleanor said, but I can't go to the police. If Gregory Blackwood is involved, he has connections throughout Lakeshire. I can't risk Rachel and Alexander's safety. So, what's your plan? Diane asked. Eleanor took a deep breath. I need to make copies of this evidence, insurance in case something happens to me, and I need someone who knows where I've gone and why. Diane nodded. I can do better than that. I still have contacts at the FDA and in the U.S. Attorney's Office, people who can't be bought. There isn't time, Eleanor objected. The meeting is at midnight. Then we work fast, Diane replied, grabbing her laptop. Copy the files while I make some calls. For the next hour, they worked side by side, Eleanor transferring the massive archive of evidence to multiple drives, while Diane made encrypted calls to contacts in Washington. At 11:30 p.m., Eleanor prepared to leave. Remember, if I don't contact you by 2 a.m., release everything to your contacts. Diane handed her a small device. Take this. It's a recording pen. Looks ordinary but captures audio and has GPS tracking. My insurance policy for you. Eleanor slipped it into her pocket. Thank you. Be careful, Diane warned. Whoever has your daughter and Alexander has nothing to lose. These people have already shown they're willing to let hundreds die for profit. The gravity of those words followed Eleanor as she drove to Lakeside Park. The lakefront area was deserted at this hour, the children's playground and picnic areas ghostly in the moonlight. She parked in the empty lot and checked her watch. 11:57 p.m. Taking the hard drive and recording pen, Eleanor walked toward the gazebo at the center of the park. Her footsteps on the wooden board sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in his 50s, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with the haunted look of someone who had lost everything. Mrs. Warner, he said, his voice matching the one from the phone call. Right on time. Eleanor summoned her courage. Where are my daughter and Alexander? Safe, he replied. My name is Robert Keller. My wife, Catherine, took Nexafan for her arthritis for 5 years. She died of liver failure 3 years ago. Eleanor's heart sank. I'm sorry for your loss. Sorry doesn't bring her back, Keller said bitterly. For years, I couldn't understand how a safe medication could destroy her liver when she had no risk factors. Then I found others, hundreds of families like mine. When we tried to sue Warner Health, their lawyers buried us in paperwork, claimed our evidence was circumstantial. That's why I'm here, Eleanor said, holding up the hard drive. This contains proof that Warner Health knew about the liver toxicity from the beginning. They falsified trial data, paid off researchers, covered up deaths. Keller's eyes fixed on the hard drive. Give it to me. First, tell me where Rachel and Alexander are. A new voice spoke from behind her. They're right here, Eleanor. She turned to see Gregory Blackwood emerging from the darkness, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. Behind them, Rachel and Alexander were led forward, hands bound. Mom, Rachel called, don't give him anything. Gregory smiled coldly. Mr. Keller has been most helpful in bringing you here, though his motivations differ from mine. You're working together? Eleanor asked, confusion evident in her voice. Temporarily, Keller replied. I want justice for my wife. He wants that evidence destroyed. And you trust him? Eleanor asked incredulously. Of course not, Keller said, but he has resources I lack. Once I have the evidence, I'll ensure the world knows the truth. Gregory stepped forward. The hard drive, Eleanor. Now. Eleanor looked from Gregory to Keller, then to Rachel and Alexander. Time to take a stand. No more hiding. No more letting others fight her battles. Before I give you anything, she said, surprising herself with her steady voice, I want to know something, Gregory. Was Thomas part of this scheme from the beginning? Did he know what you and Thornton were planning? Gregory's expression flickered with something like respect. Thomas was a brilliant scientist, but a mediocre businessman. When Thornton approached us, he initially refused their offer. All those ethical concerns he'd suppressed for years suddenly resurfacing. Then his diagnosis came. Terminal liver cancer, Eleanor said softly. Caused by his own drug, Gregory nodded. Poetic justice, don't you think? Once he knew he was dying, he became problematic. Started talking about coming clean, making amends. Victoria Thornton suggested we accelerate our timeline. And the will? Making Alexander the heir? Thomas changed it without our knowledge, Gregory admitted. We discovered it afterward and realized it could work in our favor. The outsider who takes control just before the scandal breaks. Perfect scapegoat. Eleanor turned to Keller. You see, they were planning to pin everything on an innocent man. Is that your idea of justice? Uncertainty crossed Keller's face. I just want the truth exposed. Then help me, Eleanor pleaded. This evidence doesn't just belong to Warner Health or Thornton. It belongs to your wife, to every victim of Nexaphan. Gregory's patience evaporated. Enough talking, the hard drive now, or your daughter pays the price. One of the men pressed a gun against Rachel's side. Alexander struggled against his captor, receiving a brutal blow to the stomach for his efforts. Eleanor felt a strange calm descend over her. For 29 years, she'd avoided confrontation, had let anxiety dictate her boundaries, but watching her daughter in danger ignited something primal within her. You want the hard drive? Eleanor said, pulling it from her pocket. Here it is. She held it out, but as Gregory reached for it, she pulled back. But you should know, it's not the only copy. Gregory's eyes narrowed. What? I made multiple copies, sent them to people you can't reach or intimidate. If anything happens to us, if this acquisition goes through, the evidence goes public. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Game over, Gregory. You're bluffing, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I? Eleanor countered. Thomas may have been a dishonest businessman, but he taught me one valuable lesson. Always have insurance. The recording pen in her pocket was capturing every word. Diane Morgan was waiting. The evidence was secure. For once in her life, Eleanor Warner held the power. Release them, she demanded. Now, or by morning, every newspaper in the country will have this story. Gregory and his men exchanged glances. The balance had shifted. This isn't over, Gregory warned, signaling his men to release Rachel and Alexander. Rachel ran to her mother's side. Alexander, moving more slowly from his injuries, joined them. The hard drive, Gregory insisted. Eleanor handed it over. It doesn't matter anymore. The truth is already out there. As Gregory and his men retreated into the darkness, Keller remained, his expression torn between anger and admiration. Did you really make copies? He asked. Eleanor nodded. With a journalist named Diane Morgan. She's contacting the FDA and federal prosecutors as we speak. She stepped closer to him. Help us, Mr. Keller. Add your wife's story to the evidence. Make her death mean something. The hardness in Keller's eyes softened fractionally. 347 deaths, he whispered. That's the number Thomas Warner acknowledged. The real toll is much higher. Then help us prove it, Rachel urged. Not through kidnapping or threats, but through justice. After a moment's hesitation, Keller nodded. I have records, a support group of Nexafan victims' families, medical histories, autopsy reports, patterns nobody would listen to. We're listening now, Eleanor said gently. As they left the park together, Eleanor felt the weight of anxiety lift slightly from her shoulders. There would be more battles ahead. Gregory and Thornton Pharmaceuticals wouldn't surrender easily, but she was no longer fighting alone, and she was no longer afraid. Dawn broke over Lake Charlevoix as Eleanor, Rachel, Alexander, and Robert Keller gathered at the cabin. They'd driven through the night, taking back roads to avoid detection, finally reaching the safety of the remote location as the first light touched the eastern sky. Diane Morgan texted, Rachel reported, checking the burner phone they'd purchased along the way. The U.S. Attorney's Office is interested. They're dispatching investigators to secure records before anything can be destroyed. Alexander, wincing from his bruised ribs, looked up from his laptop. I've been going through Keller's data. The pattern is clear. Patients with a specific genetic marker show dramatic liver enzyme elevation after sustained Nexafan use. A genetic predisposition that wasn't screened for in the trials, Keller added. Or rather, was identified then deliberately ignored. Eleanor sat by the window, watching the lake's surface turn golden in the morning light. We need Dr. Wilson's help more than ever now. The encrypted USB drive might contain Thomas's direct testimony about the cover-up. As if summoned by her words, a car appeared on the cabin's access road. Dr. James Wilson emerged, carrying a laptop case and looking exhausted but triumphant. I've been driving all night, he announced as they let him in. After your call about the kidnapping, I knew time was critical. Were you able to decrypt the drive? Eleanor asked anxiously. Wilson nodded, setting up his laptop on the dining table. My colleague cracked it yesterday evening. What we found, he shook his head gravely. Thomas left nothing to chance. They gathered around as Wilson opened a video file. Thomas's gaunt face appeared on screen. The recording dated just 1 week before his death. This is my formal testimony, Thomas began, his voice weak but determined. My name is Thomas Warner, founder and CEO of Warner Health Pharmaceuticals. I am recording this statement of my own free will, in sound mind, to confess to actions taken by myself and others regarding the drug Nexafan. For the next hour, they watched in silence as Thomas methodically detailed the entire history, the falsified trial data, the suppression of evidence, the payoffs to researchers, the calculated risk analysis that determined certain death rates were acceptable for corporate profit. I am solely responsible for the initial decision, Thomas continued, but over time, others became complicit. Gregory Blackwood, legal counsel, James Thornton, then CEO of Thornton Pharmaceuticals, who helped structure the initial cover-up, and his daughter Victoria Thornton, current CEO, who approached me 6 months ago with the acquisition proposal designed to bury both companies' liabilities. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face as her husband detailed his crimes, his regrets, his moral collapse. I am dying of the same liver disease our drug causes, Thomas concluded. A fitting end, perhaps. This testimony, along with the accompanying documentation, constitutes my confession and my attempt at atonement. To the victims and their families, no apology can suffice. To my wife, Eleanor, and daughter, Rachel, who will suffer for my sins, I can only beg forgiveness. The screen went black. Silence filled the cabin. He knew, Eleanor whispered finally. He knew the acquisition was a scheme to hide the evidence. That's why he changed his will, left the breadcrumbs for us to follow. A deathbed conversion doesn't undo the damage, Keller said bitterly. No, Rachel agreed, but it gives us the weapons to fight. Wilson closed his laptop. The drive contains everything: internal emails, meeting minutes, the original unaltered trial data, records of payoffs. It's overwhelming evidence of criminal fraud. We need to get this to the authorities immediately, Alexander said. And to the press, Keller added. The courts move slowly. Public opinion will force action. Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. But first, we need to stop the acquisition. It's scheduled to close in 4 days. Rachel was already on the burner phone. I'm calling my firm's litigation department. We need an emergency injunction. As the others sprang into action, Eleanor stepped outside onto the cabin's small deck. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and lake water. In the distance, a loon called to its mate, the haunting sound echoing across the water. For 29 years, she'd been Thomas Warner's quiet, supportive wife. She'd allowed her anxiety to define her boundaries, to limit her voice. Now, she would speak for those who no longer could. The victims of Nexafan, the families left behind. Inside, she could hear Rachel arguing forcefully on the phone, Alexander and Wilson discussing the scientific evidence, Keller organizing his victims' group testimonials. Eleanor Warner took a deep breath and returned to join them. The time for hiding was over. The Lakeshire County Courthouse stood imposing against the clear October sky, its limestone facade gleaming in the morning sunlight. News vans lined the street, reporters clustered on the steps, microphones and cameras at the ready. Eleanor sat in Diane Morgan's car across the street, watching the spectacle unfold. 3 days of frantic preparation had led to this moment, an emergency hearing before Judge Marilyn Harlow on their motion to block the Warner Health Thornton acquisition. "Are you ready for this?" Diane asked, her reporter's notebook already filled with preliminary notes for what promised to be the biggest story of her career. Eleanor smoothed her navy blue suit, the one Thomas had always said made her look authoritative. "No," she admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Rachel approached the car, looking every inch the powerhouse attorney in her charcoal pantsuit. "Judge Harlow has granted us 2 hours to present our evidence. Gregory's lawyers are trying to get the hearing closed to the press, but so far, the judge is insisting on transparency." "And Thornton Pharmaceuticals?" Eleanor asked. "Their legal team arrived by private jet this morning. Victoria Thornton herself is expected to attend." Rachel's expression was grim but determined. "They're throwing everything they have at this." Alexander and Dr. Wilson joined them, both carrying briefcases filled with evidence. Behind them came Robert Keller, accompanied by 7 other Nexafan victims' family members who had arrived overnight to testify. "Gregory's people have been calling witnesses all morning," Alexander reported, offering settlements, making threats. 3 have already backed out. "But most are standing firm," Keller added. "They've waited too long for this day." Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that signaled her anxiety rising. For a moment, she considered staying in the car, letting Rachel and the others handle the courtroom battle. No, she'd come too far to retreat now. "Let's go," she said, opening the car door. The reporters swarmed as they approached the courthouse steps. "Mrs. Warner, is it true your husband left evidence of fraud?" "Dr. Wilson, why did you wait 25 years to come forward?" "Mr. Martinez, how does it feel to be named heir to a pharmaceutical empire built on deception?" Eleanor kept her eyes forward, Rachel's steadying hand at her elbow, guiding her through the crush. Inside, the courthouse's marble hallway echoed with whispers and footsteps as they made their way to courtroom 3. They were nearly at the doors when Gregory Blackwood intercepted them, immaculate as always in a bespoke suit, flanked by a team of attorneys. "Eleanor," he said smoothly, "a word in private before this unfortunate spectacle begins." "Anything you have to say to my mother, you can say in court," Rachel replied coldly. Gregory's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm offering one last opportunity to avoid public humiliation. Thomas's legacy, your family name, your financial security, all can be preserved. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. My husband destroyed his own legacy when he chose profit over patients' lives. I won't compound that sin by staying silent. You're making a terrible mistake, Gregory warned, his veneer of civility cracking slightly. Victoria Thornton doesn't lose, ever. There's a first time for everything, Eleanor replied, surprised by her own confidence. As they entered the courtroom, Eleanor saw Victoria Thornton for the first time, a striking woman in her 50s with steel gray hair cut in a severe bob, her expression as unyielding as a granite cliff. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat the Warner Health and Thornton legal teams, at least 20 attorneys between them. On the other, their much smaller group, bolstered by the presence of Nexafan victims' families. Judge Marilyn Harlow, a formidable woman with 30 years on the bench, called the court to order. This is an emergency hearing on the motion to enjoin the acquisition of Warner Health Pharmaceuticals by Thornton Pharmaceuticals, she announced. Given the gravity of the allegations and the pending acquisition timeline, I've agreed to hear evidence on an expedited basis. Rachel stood. Your Honor, we have documentation proving that both Warner Health and Thornton Pharmaceuticals have engaged in a criminal conspiracy to conceal the deadly side effects of the drug Nexafan, resulting in hundreds of deaths. The proposed acquisition is the culmination of this conspiracy, a corporate shell game designed to shield both companies from liability. Gregory's lead attorney rose immediately. Your Honor, these are outrageous, unsupported allegations. Mrs. Warner is a grieving widow lashing out after discovering her husband's personal indiscretions. This is a family matter being inappropriately dragged into a business transaction. Judge Harlow's penetrating gaze moved between the parties. I'll be the judge of what's appropriate in my courtroom. Proceed with your evidence, counselor. For the next 2 hours, Rachel methodically presented their case. Thomas's video testimony, Sophia Martinez's journal, Dr. Wilson's first-hand account, the original trial data showing liver toxicity, internal emails discussing how to conceal adverse events, and finally, the testimonials of families whose loved ones had died after taking Nexafan. Robert Keller's testimony proved particularly powerful. My wife, Catherine, took Nexafan for 5 years, he told the court, his voice breaking. When her liver began to fail, Warner Health's medical experts testified that it couldn't possibly be related to their safe, FDA-approved medication. She died believing it was somehow her fault. Throughout the presentation, Eleanor watched Victoria Thornton. Unlike Gregory, whose composure occasionally slipped, Thornton remained impassive, whispering instructions to her attorneys without betraying emotion. When it was the defense's turn, Gregory's team attacked on multiple fronts, questioning the authenticity of Thomas's video, suggesting Sophia Martinez had fabricated evidence for financial gain, and emphasizing that Nexafan had helped millions of arthritis patients despite what they characterized as statistically insignificant adverse events. Your Honor, Gregory's lead attorney concluded, this entire spectacle is based on the unverified claims of a dying man, a disgruntled former employee, and grieving family members looking for someone to blame. The proposed acquisition is a standard business transaction that will preserve jobs and ensure continued production of life-improving medications. Judge Harlow removed her glasses. I've heard enough for today. Given the severity of these allegations and the imminent acquisition date, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order blocking the transaction pending a full evidentiary hearing next week. Relief washed over Eleanor. They had won the first battle, a crucial reprieve. As the courtroom began to clear, Victoria Thornton approached their table. Up close, her piercing blue eyes were calculating, assessing. Impressive performance, she said to Eleanor, her voice cultured and controlled. But this is merely a delay. Ultimately, business imperatives will prevail over emotional appeals. People died, Miss Thornton, Eleanor replied. My husband covered it up. Your company tried to bury the evidence. There's nothing emotional about those facts. Victoria's perfect composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and hard beneath. Thomas Warner was weak. He let guilt cloud his judgment at the end. I don't share that weakness. Before Eleanor could respond, Victoria turned on her heel and departed, her legal team falling in behind her like a well-trained military unit. Outside the courthouse, the press had multiplied, eager for statements. Diane Morgan, true to her word, had ensured the story was breaking nationally. Mrs. Warner, they called, will you make a statement? Eleanor hesitated. Public speaking had always been her greatest fear, the focus of her social anxiety. Rachel stepped forward, ready to shield her mother as Thomas always had. I'll handle this, Rachel murmured. No, Eleanor said quietly. I need to do this. She approached the forest of microphones, her heart pounding. Alexander stood supportively at her left, Rachel at her right. My husband, Thomas Warner, built Warner Health Pharmaceuticals into a successful company by developing medications that helped millions. Eleanor began, her voice shaky at first, but growing stronger. But 25 years ago, he made a terrible choice to conceal evidence that Nexafan, the company's most profitable drug, caused fatal liver damage in certain patients. The cameras flashed as she continued. That decision led to hundreds of deaths. Mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, people who trusted that the medications they took were safe. In his final days, Thomas left evidence of this cover-up, along with proof that Thornton Pharmaceuticals attempted to use the acquisition to bury both companies' liabilities. Eleanor looked directly into the cameras. To every family who lost someone to Nexafan, I am deeply sorry. The court has temporarily halted the acquisition, but this is just the beginning. We will continue fighting until there is full accountability, appropriate compensation for victims, and criminal charges for those responsible. A reporter called out, Mrs. Warner, are you prepared for the personal consequences of opposing these powerful companies? Eleanor thought about the comfortable life she'd led, the security she'd taken for granted, all built on a foundation of suffering she'd never questioned. The consequences of staying silent would be far worse, she answered. I spent too many years avoiding difficult truths. That ends today. As they left the courthouse, Alexander received a call from Dr. Wilson, who had returned to his lab with the original trial data. The pattern is even clearer than we thought, he reported excitedly. Patients with a specific genetic variation, about 8% of the population, metabolize Nexafan differently. In these patients, the drug creates a toxic byproduct that accumulates in liver tissue. A simple genetic test could have identified vulnerable patients, Alexander realized. Lives could have been saved. Exactly, Wilson confirmed. I'm preparing a comprehensive report for the FDA. This isn't just about stopping the acquisition anymore. Nexafan needs to be pulled from the market immediately. That evening, as they gathered in Rachel's apartment to plan their next steps, breaking news flashed across the television. A grim-faced reporter stood outside Warner Health headquarters. In a stunning development, federal agents have raided Warner Health Pharmaceuticals, seizing documents and electronic records related to allegations of fraud in the approval and marketing of the arthritis drug Nexafan. Sources confirm that similar raids are underway at Thornton Pharmaceuticals headquarters in Boston. Eleanor watched in disbelief as the camera showed Gregory Blackwood being escorted from the building, his expression thunderous. The U.S. Attorney's Office has confirmed that criminal investigations have been opened into both companies, the reporter continued. Meanwhile, the FDA has announced an emergency review of Nexafan's approval, with a decision on potential market withdrawal expected within days. Rachel muted the television. It's happening faster than I expected. The evidence must have been even more compelling than we realized. Or someone on the inside started talking to save themselves, Alexander suggested. Eleanor sat quietly, absorbing the rapidly unfolding events. For 29 years, she'd been Mrs. Thomas Warner, the supportive wife who asked few questions and avoided confrontation. Now she'd helped initiate the downfall of two pharmaceutical giants and exposed a massive public health fraud. What happens now? She asked finally. Criminal proceedings, Rachel replied. Civil lawsuits from victims' families. Congressional hearings, probably. This will take years to fully resolve. And Alexander's inheritance? Eleanor asked. The will? Alexander shook his head. I want nothing to do with Warner Health. Once this is settled, whatever remains should go to a victims' compensation fund. Eleanor nodded, having expected nothing less from him. In the short time she'd known Alexander Martinez, she'd come to respect his integrity, the moral compass his mother had instilled in him despite their difficult circumstances. And us? She asked Rachel. Our future? Rachel's expression softened. We'll be okay, Mom. Different, but okay. The house and your personal assets should be protected from corporate liability. We'll have enough. I wasn't asking about money, Eleanor clarified. I meant, who are we now after all this? Who am I, if not Thomas Warner's wife? Alexander spoke up unexpectedly. From what I've seen, you're Eleanor Warner, the woman who faced down two pharmaceutical giants because it was the right thing to do. The woman who overcame her greatest fears to speak truth to power. Rachel squeezed her mother's hand. He's right. Dad cast a long shadow. Maybe now we both get to discover who we are outside of it. Eleanor felt tears well in her eyes, not from anxiety or grief this time, but from something that felt remarkably like hope. I'd like that, she whispered. The next morning, Eleanor awoke to find Dr. Wilson and Robert Keller already at work in Rachel's dining room, organizing testimony for the upcoming hearings. Alexander was on the phone with other victims' family members, while Rachel consulted with her legal colleagues. This makeshift family had formed around a shared purpose: justice for those harmed by corporate greed, accountability for those responsible. Eleanor's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Warner, a cultured voice said when she answered. Victoria Thornton. I believe it's time we spoke directly without lawyers present. Eleanor's pulse quickened. I'm listening. I'm prepared to offer a settlement that would fully compensate all identified Nexafan victims, establish a substantial fund for future claims, and include a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing by both companies. In exchange for what? Eleanor asked, immediately suspicious. Your testimony regarding Thomas's personal involvement. The narrative becomes rogue CEO rather than systemic corporate fraud. The companies survive. Patients receive compensation. Only Thomas's legacy suffers. Eleanor felt ice in her veins. You want me to make my husband the sole scapegoat? He's already dead, Mrs. Warner. His reputation is a small price for justice for the victims. Wouldn't you agree? Eleanor thought of Thomas, the man she'd loved, the man who'd failed his own moral standards so profoundly. He deserved accountability for his actions, but not alone. The truth isn't negotiable, Ms. Thornton. Eleanor replied firmly. Thomas made the initial decision, but your father helped structure the cover-up. You personally tried to use the acquisition to bury evidence. Gregory Blackwood facilitated the entire scheme. Everyone involved will be held accountable, including you. A long silence followed. You're making a mistake, Victoria said finally, her voice hardening. This could have been clean, efficient. Now it will be messy and painful for everyone. Justice often is, Eleanor replied, ending the call. She looked around at her newfound allies, people united by purpose rather than blood or marriage. For the first time in decades, Eleanor Warner felt truly seen, not as an extension of her husband or a woman defined by her anxieties, but as herself, flawed, stronger than she'd known, and finally finding her voice. The fight ahead would be long and difficult. Victoria Thornton had resources, influence, a ruthless determination to prevail. But Eleanor had something more powerful, the truth and the courage to speak it. 1 year later, autumn leaves again painted the shores of Lake Charlevoix in brilliant hues of red and gold. Eleanor stood on the deck of the cabin, now her permanent home, watching a small gathering of people on the newly built lakeside pavilion below. "Mom," Rachel called from inside. "The caterers need to know where to set up the dessert table." "By the west windows," Eleanor replied, turning to admire her daughter. Rachel looked relaxed in casual slacks and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. The past year of intense legal battles had taken its toll, but recently, a new lightness had returned to her demeanor. The junior partnership at her firm had become full partnership, with a focus on pharmaceutical accountability cases. "Is Dr. Wilson here yet?" Eleanor asked, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd chosen for the occasion. "Just arrived with the presentation materials," Rachel confirmed, and Alexander texted, "He's about 15 minutes out with the last group of families." Eleanor nodded, taking a final moment of solitude before joining the gathering. Today marked the official launch of the Nexafan Victims Advocacy Foundation, funded primarily by the substantial settlement they'd ultimately extracted from both pharmaceutical companies. The past year had unfolded in ways she could never have predicted. The federal investigation had resulted in criminal charges against Gregory Blackwood and 3 other Warner Health executives. Victoria Thornton had avoided indictment through a cooperation agreement, but had been forced to step down as CEO. Most importantly, the FDA had withdrawn approval for Nexafan and implemented new genetic testing requirements for similar medications, potentially saving countless lives. Thomas's reputation had suffered, as Victoria had predicted. The man once celebrated as a pharmaceutical pioneer was now studied in business ethics classes as a cautionary tale. Eleanor had made peace with that truth. The real Thomas had been neither the saint of public perception nor the monster revealed by his worst decisions, but a complex human who had lost his way and, at the end, tried to find it again. Eleanor descended to the pavilion, where about 50 people had gathered, mostly families of Nexafan victims, along with medical experts, patient advocates, and journalists who had covered the story. Robert Keller approached, looking healthier than when they'd first met. Grieving his wife would never end, but the purpose he'd found in advocacy had given him a reason to care for himself again. "Eleanor," he greeted her warmly, "Catherine would have been proud of what we've accomplished." "There's still so much to do," she replied. "But we've made a start," he said. "A real one, Dr. Sran." Wilson was setting up displays showing the Foundation's 3-pronged mission: support for victims' families, funding for research into genetic factors in medication metabolism, and advocacy for stronger pharmaceutical safety regulations. Alexander arrived with the final group of attendees. At 37, he'd found his calling in patient advocacy, using his scientific background and personal connection to the case to become an effective spokesperson for reform. "Sorry we're late," he called to Eleanor. "Mrs. Diaz wanted to bring her grandchildren, so we had to find extra car seats." Eleanor welcomed the new arrivals, marveling at how her life had expanded. A year ago, her social circle had been small and carefully controlled, her anxiety limiting her interactions. Now she regularly spoke to groups, testified before regulatory bodies, and had built connections with dozens of families affected by Nexafan. The anxiety hadn't disappeared. It never would. But she had learned to move forward with it rather than being paralyzed by it. As the formal program began, Eleanor took her place at the podium. Public speaking still made her heart race, but the importance of her message always carried her through. Welcome to the official launch of the Nexafan Victims Advocacy Foundation, she began. 1 year ago, we stood together outside a courthouse, demanding justice for those harmed by corporate negligence and fraud. Today, we gather to ensure that their stories and their suffering lead to lasting change. She looked out at the faces before her, people who had lost parents, spouses, siblings to a medication they'd trusted, people who had fought for years to be heard, only to be dismissed by a system designed to protect corporate interests over patient safety. This foundation represents a new beginning, Eleanor continued, not just for us, but for how medications are tested, approved, and monitored. The genetic screening protocols developed by Dr. Wilson are already being implemented for similar drugs. The patient reporting system we advocated for has been adopted by the FDA. The legal precedents established in our case have opened doors for other victims seeking justice. After the formal presentations, Eleanor found a quiet moment alone by the lake shore. The water lapped gently at the rocks, soothing in its constancy. Rachel joined her, slipping an arm around her mother's waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" Eleanor smiled. "I was thinking about transformation, how the most painful experiences can sometimes lead to unexpected growth. Like turning from Thomas Warner's anxious wife into a formidable patient advocate?" Rachel teased gently. "Something like that," Eleanor agreed, "though I'm still figuring out who exactly Eleanor Warner is. I think everyone here knows," Rachel said, gesturing to the gathering. "You're the woman who refused to stay silent when it would have been easier to look away, the woman who faced down her greatest fears because justice mattered more." Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The journey had been painful, discovering Thomas's betrayal, confronting powerful adversaries, overcoming her own limitations. But through that crucible, she had discovered strengths she'd never known she possessed. As the sun began to set over Lake Charlevoix, casting long golden rays across the water, Eleanor and Rachel rejoined the gathering. Conversations flowed, connections deepened, plans for future advocacy took shape. Thomas's presence still lingered in Eleanor's life, in memories both cherished and painful, in the consequences of his choices that continued to ripple outward. But his shadow no longer defined her. Eleanor Warner had found her own voice, her own purpose, her own strength. And with it, an unexpected gift, the freedom to become herself.